The helicopter blades cut through the thick Afghan night as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell gripped her rifle, watching the ground rush beneath them. She had trained for this moment her entire life, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of leading her first Navy SEAL mission as the only woman in the unit. The men around her were silent, their faces painted with determination and fear in equal measure. Sarah's journey to this helicopter began 5 years earlier in a small town in Montana. She grew up on a ranch where weakness meant death for the livestock, and her father taught her that strength came not from muscle alone but from the mind's ability to solve problems under pressure. While other girls her age were worried about prom dresses, Sarah was studying military tactics and practicing marksmanship in the barn. The decision to join the Navy came after watching news coverage of a terrorist attack that claimed the lives of 36 innocent people. Sarah couldn't shake the image of children crying over their parents' bodies. That night, she made a promise to herself that she would dedicate her life to protecting others, no matter what it cost her personally. Boot camp was brutal, but Sarah thrived in the chaos. While her male counterparts relied on brute strength, she developed a reputation for creative problem-solving and an uncanny ability to remain calm under pressure. Her instructors noticed that missions went smoother when Sarah was involved in the planning process. She saw angles that others missed and found solutions where others saw only obstacles. The path to becoming a SEAL was even more challenging. Sarah faced discrimination from some fellow trainees who believed women had no place in special operations. She endured comments about her gender, doubts about her abilities, and isolation from teammates who weren't sure they could trust her with their lives. But Sarah pressed on, driven by something deeper than personal ambition. During Hell Week, the most grueling part of SEAL training, Sarah's true character emerged. While carrying a heavy boat over her head with her team, one of her teammates collapsed from exhaustion. Without hesitation, Sarah took on his share of the weight, encouraging him to keep moving forward. This act of selflessness earned her respect from even her harshest critics. Her first assignment was with SEAL Team 6, one of the most elite units in the military. The team leader, Commander Jake Thompson, was a 20-year veteran who had completed over 100 successful missions. He was skeptical about having a woman on his team, but was willing to give Sarah a chance to prove herself. The mission briefing revealed their target, a high-value terrorist leader hiding in a compound deep in enemy territory. Intelligence suggested the compound was heavily fortified with multiple escape routes and armed guards. Previous attempts by other units had failed, resulting in casualties and allowing the target to slip away each time. Sarah studied the intelligence reports carefully, noticing patterns that others had missed. The failed missions all followed similar approaches, hitting the compound from predictable angles during predictable times. The enemy had learned to anticipate these tactics and had adapted their defenses accordingly. During the pre-mission planning, Sarah suggested a different approach. Instead of a direct assault, she proposed using the compound's own security measures against them. She had identified a weakness in their communication system that could be exploited to create confusion and misdirection. Some team members dismissed her ideas as too complicated, preferring the straightforward approach they were trained for. Commander Thompson, however, was intrigued by Sarah's analysis. He had seen too many good soldiers die because they relied on the same tactics over and over again. As the helicopter approached the drop zone, Sarah felt the familiar flutter of pre-mission nerves. She had trained for this moment countless times, but training could never fully replicate the reality of live combat. The lives of her teammates depended on her ability to execute the plan flawlessly. The compound came into view, a series of concrete buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Intelligence photos hadn't captured the full complexity of the target location. Sarah quickly adjusted her mental map, identifying new challenges and opportunities that weren't visible in the satellite imagery. The helicopter touched down in a clearing 2 miles from the target. Sarah and her team moved quickly through the darkness, their night vision goggles turning the landscape into an eerie green world. Every sound seemed amplified in the silence, and Sarah could hear her own heartbeat as they approached the compound. As they reached the perimeter, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The intelligence reports were wrong. The compound wasn't just heavily defended, it was a trap. The enemy knew they were coming, and they had prepared accordingly. Guard positions that should have been occupied were empty, creating what appeared to be easy entry points that were actually kill zones. Sarah realized that her team was walking into an ambush that would likely result in their deaths or capture. The traditional approach would have been to abort the mission and return to base. But the target was too valuable to let escape again. Sarah knew she had to find a way to turn the enemy's trap against them. She quickly signaled to Commander Thompson, pointing out the inconsistencies she had noticed. The commander's expression grew grim as he realized the implications. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and walking into a carefully prepared trap. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. Her teammates were looking to her for answers, and she knew that the next few decisions would determine whether they all made it home alive. The mission that was supposed to prove her worth as a SEAL had become a test of survival against overwhelming odds. As enemy searchlights began sweeping the area around the compound, Sarah felt time running out. She needed to find a solution that would allow her team to complete their mission and escape alive. The key to their survival was hidden somewhere in the intelligence reports and battlefield observations, but she had only minutes to find it. The helicopter that had dropped them off was already gone, leaving them alone in hostile territory with limited ammunition and no backup plan. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out the fear and focusing on the problem before her. Somewhere in the chaos there was a pattern she could exploit, a weakness she could turn into an advantage. When she opened her eyes, Sarah saw the compound with fresh perspective. The trap that had been set for them wasn't just a danger, it was also an opportunity. The enemy's confidence in their ambush had made them predictable in their own way. Sarah began to formulate a plan that would use their expectations against them, turning the hunters into the hunted. Sarah's mind raced as she analyzed the compound's defensive pattern. The empty guard posts weren't random. They formed a deliberate funnel designed to channel attacking forces into predetermined kill zones. But the enemy's confidence in their trap had created a blind spot that Sarah could exploit. She motioned for her team to take cover behind a cluster of rocks while she explained her observations. The compound had motion sensors along the obvious approach routes, but the areas they avoided were actually the safest paths. The enemy expected attackers to use stealth and avoid detection, so they had focused their surveillance on the routes that seemed most secure. Commander Thompson listened intently as Sarah outlined her revised plan. Instead of approaching from the expected direction, they would move through the areas with the heaviest sensor coverage, using the enemy's own security system to mask their approach. The constant false alarms from small animals and wind-blown debris would hide their movement. The first phase required splitting the team into 3 groups. Sarah would lead 2 men through the main sensor field while Commander Thompson took the rear, others around the eastern perimeter. The third group would create a diversion on the western side, drawing the enemy's attention away from the real infiltration routes. As they moved into position, Sarah felt the familiar calm that came with executing a well-planned operation. Her training kicked in and every movement became precise and purposeful. The sensors detected their presence multiple times, but as predicted, the guards dismissed the alerts as false positives. The compound's communication system became the next piece of Sarah's puzzle. During her intelligence analysis, she had identified a vulnerability in their radio encryption that could be exploited with the right equipment. The team's tech specialist, Petty Officer Martinez, had the tools needed to intercept and manipulate enemy communications. Sarah directed Martinez to tap into the compound's radio network, while the diversion team began their work. Within minutes, confused chatter filled the enemy's communication channels as guards reported contradictory information about the attackers' locations and numbers. The carefully orchestrated ambush began to unravel as defenders were pulled in different directions. The plan was working, but Sarah knew they were still outnumbered and operating deep in hostile territory. One mistake would compromise the entire mission and likely result in casualties or capture. She monitored the enemy's response patterns, adjusting her team's movements to stay ahead of their defensive measures. As they penetrated deeper into the compound, Sarah noticed something that changed everything. The building layout didn't match the intelligence photos they had studied. New construction had added rooms and corridors that created unexpected choke points and escape routes. The target could be anywhere, and they were running out of time. Before the enemy reorganized their defenses, Sarah made a split-second decision to adapt the mission parameters. Instead of following the predetermined assault plan, she began tracking the compound's power distribution system. High-value targets always required secure communications and computer equipment, which meant they needed reliable electricity. By following the power cables, she could identify the most important areas of the compound. The approach led them to a reinforced building in the center of the complex. Unlike the other structures, this one showed signs of recent upgrades and had multiple backup power systems. Sarah was confident they had found their target, but the building's defenses were more sophisticated than anything they had encountered before. Commander Thompson's group had successfully disabled the compound's main generator, plunging most of the facility into darkness. The backup systems kept essential areas illuminated, but the confusion allowed Sarah's team to advance undetected through the shadows between buildings. As they approached the target building, Sarah identified the final piece of the puzzle. The structure had been designed with multiple escape tunnels, but the builders had made a critical error in their planning. The tunnel system created structural weak points that could be exploited to trap anyone inside. Sarah positioned explosive charges at key support points around the building's foundation. The plan wasn't to bring down the structure, but to seal the escape routes and force the occupants to surrender or face capture through the main entrance. It was a calculated risk that required precise timing and coordination. The team's communications specialist reported increased radio chatter from the compound's command center. The enemy was beginning to understand that they were facing a coordinated assault rather than a random attack. Time was running short before they would mount an organized counterattack. Sarah gave the signal to begin the final phase of the assault. The explosive charges detonated simultaneously, sending tremors through the target building and collapsing the tunnel entrances as planned. Smoke and debris filled the air, creating additional cover for the advancing SEAL team. The building's occupants were trapped, but they weren't defenseless. Gunfire erupted from the upper floors as enemy fighters took defensive positions at windows and doorways. Sarah and her team found themselves pinned down in the courtyard, unable to advance or retreat safely. This was the moment Sarah had trained for her entire career. Under intense enemy fire, with limited ammunition and no backup support, she needed to find a way to complete the mission and get her team out alive. The conventional approach would be to call for air support or reinforcements, but neither option was available in their current situation. Sarah analyzed the building's defensive fire patterns, looking for gaps and weaknesses she could exploit. The enemy fighters were disciplined and well-trained, but they were also predictable in their defensive tactics. They focused their fire on the most obvious approach routes while leaving other areas lightly defended. She noticed that the building's main water supply entered through an external pipe that ran along the eastern wall. The pipe was large enough for a person to crawl through and would provide access to the building's interior while avoiding the defended entrances. It was a risky approach that would leave the infiltrator vulnerable if discovered, but it might be their only option. Sarah made the decision to enter the building alone through the water pipe, while her team provided covering fire from multiple positions. Commander Thompson protested the plan, arguing that it was too dangerous for one person to attempt alone. But Sarah was convinced it was their best chance for success. As she crawled through the narrow pipe, Sarah could hear gunfire and explosions from the courtyard behind her. Her teammates were risking their lives to create the diversion she needed, and she was determined not to let their sacrifice be in vain. The pipe was cramped and filled with stagnant water, but it provided the concealment she needed to reach the building's interior undetected. The water pipe led Sarah into the building's basement, where she found herself in a maze of storage rooms and mechanical equipment. The sound of gunfire from above echoed through the concrete walls, reminding her that her teammates were still engaged in the firefight outside. She moved carefully through the darkness, using her night vision goggles to navigate the unfamiliar layout. Sarah discovered that the basement contained more than just storage areas. Hidden behind a false wall, she found a sophisticated command center with multiple computer screens displaying surveillance feeds from around the compound. The enemy had been monitoring their every move since they arrived, which explained how they had walked into such a well-prepared ambush. The surveillance system revealed something even more disturbing. The compound wasn't just a hideout for the terrorist leader they were hunting. It was a training facility where dozens of fighters were being prepared for attacks on civilian targets. The intelligence reports had severely underestimated the scope of the operation they were facing. Sarah quickly photographed the computer screens and downloaded files that would provide valuable intelligence about future terrorist plans. But her primary mission remained unchanged: capture or eliminate the high-value target who had evaded previous operations. The surveillance feed showed him barricaded in an upstairs room with several bodyguards. Moving through the building's interior required all of Sarah's stealth training. The enemy fighters were focused on the external threat, but there were still guards patrolling the hallways and stairwells. Sarah used her knowledge of human psychology to predict their movement patterns, timing her advances to avoid detection. On the second floor, Sarah encountered her first real obstacle. A heavily armed guard was stationed at the bottom of the staircase leading to the third floor, where the target was located. The guard's position provided him with clear sight lines down multiple corridors, making it impossible to approach without being seen. Sarah studied the guard's behavior, looking for weaknesses she could exploit. He was disciplined and alert, but he had developed a routine that created brief windows of opportunity. Every few minutes he would check his radio for updates from the command center, turning his attention away from the staircase for just a few seconds. When the next radio check came, Sarah moved with lightning speed. She covered the distance to the guard in 3 quick steps, using a sleeper hold to render him unconscious before he could raise an alarm. She dragged his body into a storage closet and continued toward the staircase. The third floor presented a new set of challenges. The target's room was at the end of a long hallway with no cover or concealment. 2 guards were stationed outside the door, and their positions had been chosen to provide overlapping fields of fire that would make any direct assault extremely dangerous. Sarah realized that a frontal assault would likely result in casualties, including potentially the target himself. The mission parameters required capturing him alive if possible, as the intelligence he possessed could prevent future attacks on innocent civilians. She needed to find a way to neutralize the guards without triggering a firefight. The building's original blueprints, which Sarah had memorized during mission planning, showed that the third floor had been designed as luxury apartments before being converted to its current use. This meant there were connecting balconies between rooms that might provide an alternative approach route. Sarah backtracked to an empty room and carefully opened the window leading to the balcony. The night air carried the sound of ongoing gunfire. From the courtyard, where her teammates were still maintaining their diversion, she moved along the narrow balcony, staying low to avoid being silhouetted against the sky. The target's room had reinforced windows and additional security measures that hadn't been visible from the surveillance feeds. Sarah could hear voices, inside speaking in Arabic, discussing evacuation plans and contingency options. The terrorist leader was preparing to escape through one of the sealed tunnels, apparently unaware that the exits had been destroyed. Sarah positioned herself outside the target's window and prepared for the most critical moment of the mission. She had one chance to breach the room and capture the target before he could destroy valuable intelligence or trigger explosive devices that might be hidden throughout the building. Using a small explosive charge, Sarah blew out the reinforced window and entered the room in a shower of glass and debris. The terrorist leader and his bodyguards were caught completely off guard by the unexpected entry point. Sarah's surprise assault gave her the advantage she needed to control the situation. The room erupted in chaos as the bodyguards reached for their weapons. Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, using non-lethal force to neutralize the guards while keeping the target in sight. Her training had prepared her for close-quarters combat, and she used the confined space to her advantage. The terrorist leader attempted to reach a detonator on a nearby table, presumably connected to explosive devices throughout the compound. Sarah tackled him before he could trigger the device, wrestling the detonator away and securing it safely. The implications of what might have happened if he had succeeded sent chills down her spine. With the target secured and the immediate threat neutralized, Sarah radioed her team to report mission success. But her celebration was short-lived when Commander Thompson's voice crackled through her earpiece with urgent news. Enemy reinforcements were approaching the compound, and the team needed to evacuate immediately. The original extraction plan had called for helicopter pickup at a designated landing zone 2 miles from the compound, but the approaching enemy forces would cut off that route before the team could reach safety. Sarah realized they were trapped in hostile territory with no viable escape plan. Looking at the compound's layout from her elevated position, Sarah began to formulate an emergency extraction strategy. The enemy's own security measures could be turned against them once again, but it would require precise coordination and split-second timing from her entire team. Sarah noticed that the compound's vehicle depot contained several armored trucks that could provide protection during an escape attempt. The depot was located near the eastern wall, which offered the most direct route to friendly territory, but reaching the vehicles would require crossing open ground under heavy fire from the approaching reinforcements. The key to success lay in using the compound's own defensive systems against the incoming enemy forces. Sarah instructed Martinez to hack into the compound's automated defense network, which included motion-activated spotlights and alarm systems designed to detect intruders. By triggering the defense systems at strategic moments, they could create confusion among the reinforcements and provide cover for their escape attempt. The approaching enemy forces would be caught in their own security net, giving Sarah's team the distraction they needed to reach the vehicles. Sarah gathered her team in the compound's central courtyard, where they could coordinate their final assault on the vehicle depot. The terrorist leader was secured with zip ties and would have to be carried during the escape attempt. Every team member understood that failure would likely result in death or capture in hostile territory. The sound of approaching vehicles grew, louder as the enemy reinforcements closed in on their position. Sarah checked her watch and realized they had less than 5 minutes before the compound would be completely surrounded. The margin for error had disappeared, and success would depend entirely on perfect execution of their desperate escape plan. Sarah's team moved through the compound's central courtyard like shadows, each member understanding their role in the desperate escape plan. The captured terrorist leader was carried between 2 team members, his valuable intelligence making him worth the additional risk and burden during their flight to safety. The vehicle depot was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, designed to keep intruders out, but now serving as an obstacle for Sarah's team trying to get in. The depot contained 3 armored trucks that could provide the protection they needed to break through enemy lines, but reaching them required crossing 50 meters of open ground. Sarah positioned herself at the compound's communication center, where Martinez had successfully hacked into the defensive systems. With her finger on the trigger for the automated security network, she waited for the perfect moment to create maximum chaos among the approaching reinforcements. The first enemy vehicles appeared at the compound's main gate just as Sarah activated the security systems. Blinding spotlights erupted across the facility, accompanied by deafening alarm sirens that shattered the night silence. The reinforcements found themselves caught in the glare of their own defensive measures, unable to distinguish between attackers and shadows. Commander Thompson led the assault on the vehicle depot while Sarah provided electronic warfare support from her position. The team moved with practiced precision, cutting through the fence and advancing toward the armored trucks under cover of the confusion she had created. The terrorist reinforcements responded exactly as Sarah had predicted, firing at every shadow and movement they detected in the blazing lights. Their undisciplined response created a crossfire that was more dangerous to themselves than to Sarah's team, who used the chaos to mask their own movements through the compound. Sarah's analysis of human behavior under stress had proved accurate once again. When faced with sensory overload and conflicting information, even trained fighters would revert to basic survival instincts rather than tactical thinking. The enemy's panic was providing better cover than any smokescreen could have delivered. The first armored truck roared to life as Petty Officer Rodriguez, the team's mechanic, hot-wired the ignition system. The vehicle's armor plating showed evidence of previous combat encounters, with bullet holes and shrapnel damage that had been hastily repaired. But the engine sounded strong, and the tires appeared to be in good condition. Sarah abandoned her position at the communication center and sprinted toward the depot as her teammates loaded into the vehicles. The captured terrorist leader was secured in the middle truck, surrounded by team members who would guard him during the dangerous journey ahead. The compound's main gate had been designed to keep enemies out, not to prevent escapes from within. Sarah had identified this weakness during her initial reconnaissance, noting that the gate's electronic locks could be overridden from the communication center she had just vacated. As the 3 armored trucks formed a convoy in the depot, Sarah transmitted the override codes that unlocked the compound's main gate. The massive steel barriers swung open just as the lead truck accelerated toward the exit, timing that required perfect coordination between all team members. The enemy reinforcements were caught off guard by the sudden appearance of the escaping convoy. Their vehicles were positioned to repel an attack from outside the compound, not to stop an escape from within. This tactical oversight gave Sarah's team the few seconds they needed to break through the initial perimeter. But the element of surprise lasted only moments. As soon as the enemy commanders realized what was happening, they redirected their forces to pursue the escaping SEALs. The narrow mountain roads that led away from the compound became a gauntlet of enemy fire and desperate maneuvering. Sarah rode in the lead truck, using her knowledge of the local terrain to guide the convoy along the safest possible route. The roads were treacherous even without enemy pursuit, with steep drops and sharp turns that could be fatal at high speeds. Every curve brought the possibility of an ambush or roadblock. The pursuing enemy vehicles were lighter and more maneuverable than the armored trucks, allowing them to close the distance despite the SEALs' head start. Machine gun fire began to rake the convoy as the chase intensified, forcing Sarah's team to return fire while maintaining their desperate speed. Rodriguez proved his skill as both a mechanic and a combat driver, keeping the heavily loaded truck on the narrow road despite taking fire from multiple directions. The vehicle's armor absorbed most of the incoming rounds, but Sarah could hear the engine beginning to strain under the combination of high speed and battle damage. The second truck, carrying the terrorist leader, came under the heaviest attack, as the enemy focused their efforts on preventing the valuable prisoner from escaping. Commander Thompson made the difficult decision to switch positions in the convoy, moving the target to the rear truck while the damaged vehicle took point to absorb enemy fire. Sarah studied the terrain ahead, looking for opportunities to break contact with their pursuers. The mountain roads offered both challenges and advantages, with numerous side routes that could be used for evasion or ambush. But choosing the wrong path could lead them into a dead end or impassable terrain. A bridge, spanning a deep ravine, appeared ahead, its narrow span forcing the convoy to slow down and cross in single file. Sarah realized that the bridge represented both their greatest vulnerability and their best chance to stop the pursuit. If they could damage the structure after crossing, it would buy them the time they needed to reach friendly territory. Tier. Plan required split-second timing and perfect execution. Sarah's truck would cross first and take position to provide covering fire, while the other vehicles made the crossing. Once all 3 trucks were safely across, they would destroy the bridge using the remaining explosive charges from their original mission. The pursuing vehicles were closing fast as the lead truck reached the bridge. Sarah could see muzzle flashes in her side mirror as enemy fighters continued to pour fire into the convoy. The bridge's aging concrete and steel structure looked sturdy enough to support the armored trucks, but she couldn't be certain without a proper engineering assessment. The truck's tires rumbled across the bridge's metal grating, as Rodriguez maintained their speed despite the narrow width and lack of guardrails. One wrong move would send them plummeting into the ravine below, but slowing down would give the enemy time to destroy the bridge before all vehicles could cross. Sarah held her breath as the second truck entered the bridge span. The structure groaned under the weight of the heavily armored vehicles, and she could see stress fractures beginning to appear in the concrete supports. The bridge was older and weaker than it had appeared from a distance, and she began to doubt whether it would support all 3 trucks. The enemy vehicles reached the bridge approach just as the third SEAL truck began its crossing. Sarah made a split-second decision to detonate the explosive charges immediately, rather than waiting for all vehicles to clear the span. It was a calculated risk that could save the mission or destroy her own team in the process. The explosives detonated. With a thunderous roar that echoed through the mountain valley, the bridge's center span collapsed into the ravine, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal crashing into the depths below. The pursuing vehicles skidded to a halt at the edge of the destroyed bridge, unable to continue their chase. But Sarah's gamble had come at a cost. The third truck, still on the bridge when the charges detonated, was caught in the collapse. The vehicle disappeared into the ravine along with the destroyed bridge span, taking 2 team members and valuable equipment with it. Sarah felt the weight of command as she realized her decision had cost lives in order to save the mission. Sarah stared at the collapsed bridge in horror, watching debris settle into the ravine where her teammates had disappeared. The silence that followed the explosion was deafening, broken only by the distant shouts of enemy soldiers on the opposite side of the destroyed span. 2 good men were gone, and the weight of that loss threatened to overwhelm her. Commander Thompson's voice crackled through her radio, bringing her back to the immediate reality of their situation. The surviving team members were still in hostile territory with a valuable prisoner, and enemy forces would find alternate routes to continue their pursuit. There was no time to mourn the fallen until they reached safety. Sarah forced herself to focus on the mission parameters and the lives that still depended on her leadership. The terrorist leader they had captured possessed intelligence that could prevent future attacks on innocent civilians. The sacrifice of her teammates would be meaningless if she allowed grief to compromise the operation. The 2 remaining trucks continued along the mountain road, but their situation had become increasingly desperate. The vehicles were running low on fuel, their armor was compromised by enemy fire, and the team was down to limited ammunition. Worse yet, Sarah realized they were heading into unfamiliar territory without updated intelligence about enemy positions. The captured terrorist leader had remained silent during the firefight and escape, but now he began speaking in broken English. He claimed to have information about other planned attacks and offered to cooperate in exchange for protection from his own organization. Sarah wasn't sure whether to trust him, but his knowledge could prove invaluable if they survived long enough to debrief him. Rodriguez reported that the lead truck's engine was beginning to overheat from the combination of high-speed driving and battle damage. The cooling system had been punctured by enemy fire, and they would need to stop soon to prevent complete mechanical failure. Sarah scanned the terrain ahead, looking for a defensible position where they could make temporary repairs. A small village appeared in the valley below, its lights suggesting the presence of civilians who might provide assistance or shelter. But Sarah knew that in this region, the line between friend and enemy was often unclear. The villagers might be sympathetic to the terrorist cause, or they might simply be caught between opposing forces. Sarah made the decision to bypass the village and continue toward a ridgeline that would provide better defensive positions if they were forced to make a stand. The rough terrain would slow their progress but would also make it difficult for enemy vehicles to pursue them effectively. The second truck began falling behind as its damaged engines struggled with the steep grade. Commander Thompson reported that they were leaving a trail of fluid that enemy trackers could easily follow. Sarah realized they would need to abandon at least one vehicle soon, consolidating their personnel and resources for the final push to friendly territory. The ridgeline revealed a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape, showing both the opportunities and dangers that lay ahead. A main highway crossed the valley floor several miles away, representing the fastest route to safety, but also the most likely place for enemy roadblocks and ambushes. Sarah used her binoculars to study the highway for signs of enemy activity, while Rodriguez worked to repair the cooling system with limited tools and spare parts. The terrorist leader watched their preparations with interest, apparently calculating his own chances of survival under various scenarios. The highway appeared clear of enemy vehicles, but Sarah noticed dust clouds in the distance that suggested approaching convoys. Time was running out, and they would have to make their move soon regardless of the mechanical problems that plagued their vehicles. Commander Thompson suggested splitting the team, with half the personnel continuing toward the highway while the others provided overwatch from the ridge. Sarah rejected this plan, knowing that dividing their already depleted forces would only make them more vulnerable to enemy attack. Instead, Sarah proposed using the damaged truck as a decoy, while the team escaped in the remaining vehicle. The abandoned truck would be rigged with explosive charges and positioned to suggest that the team had made a defensive stand on the ridge. When enemy forces investigated, the explosion would eliminate some of their pursuers while providing cover for the real escape attempt. The plan required careful timing and precise placement of the decoy vehicle. Sarah positioned it behind a cluster of rocks where it would be visible from the valley but protected from initial observation. The explosive charges were set with a timer that would give the team enough time to clear the area before detonation. As they prepared to abandon the ridge position, Sarah took one last look at the territory they had crossed during their desperate escape. The compound where they had captured the terrorist leader was no longer visible, but smoke from the ongoing fires still rose into the night sky. The mission had succeeded, but at a cost that would haunt her for years to come. The surviving truck descended toward the highway with its engine barely functioning and its occupants exhausted from hours of combat and evasion. Sarah monitored enemy radio communications through their captured equipment, learning that search teams were being deployed along all major routes leading out of the region. The highway crossing would be the most dangerous moment of their entire escape attempt. Once they reached the open road, there would be no cover or concealment available, and their damaged vehicle would be easily visible to enemy aircraft or surveillance teams. Sarah identified a construction zone where road work had created temporary barriers and alternate traffic patterns. The confusion of construction equipment and detour signs would provide some concealment for their crossing, but only if they could time their approach to avoid enemy patrols. The explosive charges on the ridge detonated just as they reached the highway, creating a spectacular fireball that would draw enemy attention away from their actual position. Sarah felt a grim satisfaction at the success of her deception, knowing that it had probably saved their lives. But their ordeal was far from over. The highway led through several more miles of hostile territory before reaching the relative safety of friendly checkpoints. The terrorist leader had become increasingly agitated as they approached areas where his own organization might attempt a rescue or elimination operation. Sarah realized that their prisoner represented both an asset and a liability. His intelligence value was undeniable, but his presence also made them a target for both enemy forces and competing intelligence agencies. The final phase of their escape would require navigating political complexities as well as military threats. The damaged truck's engine finally seized completely as they crested a hill that revealed lights in the distance. Sarah wasn't sure whether the lights represented salvation or another deadly challenge, but she knew that their journey was far from over. The key she had discovered wasn't just about tactical innovation, it was about understanding that every mission required constant adaptation and the courage to make impossible choices under extreme pressure. The lights in the distance turned out to be a forward operating base that Sarah recognized from her mission briefings. After hours of uncertainty and mortal danger, they had finally reached friendly territory. But even as relief washed over her exhausted team, Sarah knew that their real work was just beginning. The base's security team emerged to meet them as the smoking truck rolled through the perimeter gates. Sarah's appearance, covered in dust, blood, and debris from the night's combat, told the story of their harrowing escape better than any debriefing report could capture. The terrorist leader was immediately transferred to a secure holding facility for interrogation. Within hours, intelligence analysts were poring over the documents and files that Sarah had retrieved from the compound's command center. The information revealed a network of planned attacks across multiple countries, with targets that included schools, hospitals, and shopping centers where innocent families gathered. The scope of the terrorist organization was far larger than anyone had imagined. Sarah found herself in the base's medical facility, where doctors treated her minor injuries while she provided initial debriefing information to intelligence officers. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the mission was beginning to fade, replaced by exhaustion and the growing weight of what they had discovered. Commander Thompson sat beside her hospital bed, his own injuries being tended by medical staff. The loss of their two teammates during the bridge collapse hung heavy between them, an unspoken grief that would require time and counseling to process properly. But both knew that their sacrifice had prevented something far worse. The terrorist leader's interrogation revealed even more disturbing details about planned attacks. He provided names, locations, and timetables that allowed intelligence agencies to prevent multiple terrorist operations across 3 continents. The information Sarah had gathered during her brief time in the compound's command center proved to be the key that unlocked an entire network of terror cells. Over the following weeks, coordinated raids based on Sarah's intelligence resulted in the capture of dozens of terrorist operatives and the prevention of attacks that could have killed thousands of innocent people. The mission that had seemed like a disaster during its execution had become one of the most successful counter-terrorism operations in recent history. But success came at a personal cost for Sarah. The decisions she had made during the mission, particularly the bridge detonation that had killed her teammates, haunted her during quiet moments. She understood intellectually that her choices had saved lives and prevented greater tragedies, but the emotional weight of command was heavier than she had expected. The Navy recognized Sarah's leadership and tactical innovation with commendations and promotion opportunities. Her ability to adapt traditional assault tactics to exploit enemy weaknesses had revolutionized how special operations teams approached similar missions. Military academies began teaching case studies based on her methods. Sarah discovered that her true strength wasn't in following established procedures, but in finding creative solutions when conventional approaches failed. The key she had found wasn't a physical object or a piece of technology. It was a mindset that combined analytical thinking with intuitive understanding of human behavior under stress. Her success opened doors to advanced training programs and leadership positions that had previously been closed to women in special operations. Sarah became a mentor to other female service members who aspired to join elite units, sharing her experiences and encouraging them to find their own unique strengths. The captured terrorist leader eventually provided testimony that led to the dismantling of several major terror networks. His cooperation, motivated by fear of his own organization's retribution, gave investigators insights into recruitment methods, funding sources, and operational planning that had remained mysterious for years. Sarah returned to active duty with a new understanding of her role in the larger mission of protecting innocent lives. Each subsequent operation built on the lessons learned during that first command experience, refining her ability to see patterns and exploit weaknesses that others missed. The compound they had raided was eventually destroyed by airstrikes, but not before additional intelligence teams had thoroughly documented its contents and construction. The facility had been a training ground for hundreds of terrorists over several years, making its elimination a significant blow to the organization's capabilities. Sarah's approach to mission planning became the subject of military doctrine revisions. Her emphasis on psychological warfare and turning enemy advantages into vulnerabilities was incorporated into training programs for special operations forces worldwide. The traditional approach of overwhelming firepower gave way to more nuanced tactics that emphasized intelligence and adaptability. Years later, Sarah would reflect on that night in Afghanistan as the moment when she truly understood what it meant to be a leader in combat. The key she had discovered wasn't just about tactical innovation. It was about accepting responsibility for impossible decisions and finding the courage to act when failure meant the loss of innocent lives. The families of the 2 teammates who died in the bridge collapse received full military honors and support, but Sarah never stopped feeling responsible for their sacrifice. She established a scholarship fund in their memory, helping to educate the children of fallen service members who had died protecting others. Sarah's career continued to advance as she applied her hard-won insights to increasingly complex missions around the world. Each operation presented new challenges that required creative solutions, but she now possessed the confidence and experience to find answers where others saw only problems. The terrorist organization they had struck that night never fully recovered from the loss of their training facility and the exposure of their networks. Splinter groups continued to pose threats, but the coordinated large-scale attacks they had been planning were prevented by the intelligence Sarah's team had gathered at such great cost. In quiet moments, Sarah would remember the weight of command and the price of victory. The key she had found, the ability to see beyond conventional solutions and adapt to changing circumstances, had made her an effective leader, but it had also taught her that every success in the world of special operations came with sacrifices that would echo through the lives of those left behind. The mission reports would record it as a successful operation that prevented multiple terrorist attacks and saved countless innocent lives. But for Sarah, it would always be remembered as the night she learned that true leadership meant finding the strength to make impossible choices and live with their consequences, knowing that the alternative was far worse.